stop getting distracted. My name is Jo Keeler and I'm the Managing Director here at Belbin. Over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to be looking at hybrid teams. The fact that they don't fail because of where people work, they tend to fail because of how people work. So what is it that we do at Belbin? For those of you who may not be familiar with us as an organisation, we provide the science behind high-performing teams. Belbin is a research-based team role framework used in organisations worldwide to improve collaboration and performance. Based on work-based behaviour, not personality types, we help teams unlock their value and deliver business results. And we've been doing this for over 50 years. We've been working with teams globally for decades. It's what we do. And we really enjoy and get a lot from helping those teams working better together. Okay. A little bit of housekeeping. You will be sent a recording. You'll be sent it this afternoon, along with links to any articles or anything that we mentioned that I think you might find useful. I won't be putting them in the comments as I go along because I find people then just read them and they forget to listen in. And also because I'm trying to master the chat and the talking at the same time. So apologies for that, but you will receive a recording later on this afternoon once everything's downloaded and we're able to do that. Okay. So why are we talking about hybrid teams? Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It's such an interesting topic, especially on LinkedIn. I find that people are either for or against working in the office, working at home, doing a bit of both, being told to go back into the office, wanting to stay at home. And this isn't what this webinar is about. This webinar isn't whether or not working from home or working hybrid or working completely online is the way forward. It's looking at how people work regardless of that environment. So we're not going to be entering in any debate, but we will be touching on it a little because we are finding that different team or behaviours prefer working in different environments, and we'll come to that. Now, there is so much written now about hybrid working. There was nothing about 6 or 7 years ago, and now there's a deluge of papers, etc., which all talk about the pros and cons of where we work, not necessarily how we work. Rather than go through all of that, I'd just like to show you something which I think is quite interesting. I will put this on the link to the email that goes out to everybody. And it's the House of Lords Select Committee on Home-Based Working. It was published in November. Here it is. It's a very thick document. And they asked the opinions of, actually, I think it was hundreds, and if not, definitely over 100 experts, be it the CIPD, be it the CMI, different universities, etc., for their thoughts and feedback on hybrid working. And they've collated all of this into one really easy to read document. And it really does help to understand the discussions, the concerns, the viewpoints of such this really vast subject area. I'll just give you a couple of examples of some things that have been taken from there. I love this one. This is one of the quotes from one of the respondees as part of this report. There is nothing worse saying to people, here is your Zoom license and here is your hybrid work. You have to come in once or twice a week without structure. And that individual comes in and there's nobody there and they sit on Zoom calls all day. And at the end of the day, think, well, what was the point? I think this is a theme that goes throughout, is that organisations want to embrace hybrid working. And there's lots of research to say how it does increase well-being, etc. But how much focus are we putting on understanding how to work in a hybrid environment? Another quote saying that organisations needed to provide an environment, whether virtual or in person, that would allow for those wonderful serendipitous moments where people could brainstorm and exchange ideas, really emphasising the need to adapt communication styles for when we are working remotely. A lot of people saying that hybrid working really has got potential to hit that sweet spot. I love this quote here from Stephen Noakes, who refers to heads up, head down working. When people are home based, they can do far more heads down activity, and heads up activity is when we're looking at that collaboration, that connectivity. So there is a lot written about hybrid working. I really do recommend you download this report because it gives you such an insight. Now, at Belbin, we've also done a lot of research. We carried out a lot of research during COVID and also after COVID. And we asked a series of questions of people, but we could link their responses to their team roles. So we were able to look at these sort of bigger picture questions, but linking it to their team role. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just looking at that. But then what we're going to do is we are going to look at each of those 9 team roles, those 9 team role behaviours, and look at how they best communicate in a hybrid environment. Then we're going to give you some ideas on how you can really use this information for your teams to be effective, regardless of where they are based. One thing that did come up a lot throughout the research is that what we do need to do is we need to be really deliberate with our teams. We need to find out more about them, but be deliberate in the way that we manage them in a hybrid environment and also when working fully remotely. And we need to help managers manage this. We need a lot of training. And the Select Committee actually emphasised the importance of management training generally and also specifically within this particular subject. Okay, so what did we find when we looked at our data, our questions, looking at those team roles? Well, the first question that we asked was whether or not people were engaged with their work. Now, we're not going to go through all of the research. Again, I'll put a link to that in the email at the end. And you can see here that we've got each of the team roles at the bottom with their abbreviations. And in green is the answer to yes in both contexts. In blue, it's more when I'm in the workplace. So when I'm face to face with people, I'm physically in the office. And the pink there is more so when working remotely. So when working outside of the office. So are people engaged in their work? Well, the green bars there really show that regardless of team roles, they are engaged in their work in both contexts, whether or not it's hybrid, whether or not it's in the office or it's in person. There are some differences there, as you can see. The plant says actually that equally they are engaged when they are both either, but also more so when working remotely. That remote element came up far more there with that plant role. So we can see there are differences there when engaged in their work. We then asked, are you engaged with your team? And as you can see, it's not so dominated with that green. Engagement with the team looks like the blues coming up there, more so when at their workplace. Not necessarily for every team role here. You can see the monitor evaluator is saying that actually they're still engaged with their team in either situation, whether online or whether not in person. And we could talk about this because the monitor evaluator is the one that takes the emotion out of the decision-making process. They're the ones that take all of that information and they like to sit back, weigh up the pros and cons, and make the right decision. So actually, they're quite detached from the team anyway, which may mean that that's why they don't feel that there's any difference between the contexts. Again, with the resource investigator, you can see again that green bar that yes, they are engaged with their team in both contexts. Now, the resource investigator role is the one that's always out. They're the ones who are talking to people, going outside of their organisation, finding ideas and thoughts that they can bring back in. So again, less dependent on being with the team all of the time, slightly more disconnected from the team than the other team roles, which may makes this particular, I can't get my words out now, which can explain, that's the word I'm looking for, explain this result. But again, we can see there are variances depending on your behavioural styles. Another question we asked is whether or not they were connected to the organisational's culture. Now we can see there that the plant, again in blue, is saying more so when at my workplace. I feel more connected with the values, the way that we do things when I am in the workplace, not when I am working virtually. I think this one's an interesting one because the plant is one that is always coming up with different ideas. They like to work by themselves, that they like to sit back, they like to be able to ponder, to think, to come up with all those original thoughts, all that creativity. And although they may enjoy doing this and find them very connected doing this by themselves, they need people around them to feel that connection. And they're not actively going to go out and seek those people online. They wait for that organization to be able, when they're in the organization, to actually find and feel those, that culture, that sense of belonging there. But again, we can see some differences. The specialist, again, the ones who are head down, the ones that are really taking a deep dive into a particular subject area, the thirst for knowledge, again, they're very effective when working by themselves. They need to physically be somewhere to feel connected to that organizational's culture. We're not going to, like I said, delve too much into this. It's just to really give you a feel for the differences depending on your behavior as to how you feel about remote working, hybrid working, and in-person working. Now, this is one we really would like to stay on a little bit, and we're going to go and look at each of these team roles in more detail in a sec. And this is talking about communication within my team is effective. How is that for each of those particular team roles? Now, of course, this can have a bearing on what do we think effective communication is. So, for example, a shaper who is the one who's got high energy, very task focused, go, 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 get it done. They may deem effective communication the fact that everybody's just done what they've asked them to do and quickly. It could be that a team worker looking at communication is ensuring that communication is when somebody feels heard. Perhaps communication more about listening and feeling. So communication can mean different things to different team roles. But is it effective when working in a hybrid environment? Now, the monitor evaluator again is saying it doesn't matter where I am. It doesn't matter. Communication is equally as effective for the same reasons as before. They're more disconnected with the team. The completer finisher says more so when at the workplace, as does the coordinator, as does the plant and the specialist. They feel that communication is more effective when at the workplace. Interestingly, the shaper and the resource investigator again say it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter where they are. I think it's really interesting to look at these results because it gives us an insight into how people will be feeling, whether or not they're feeling isolated when they're working remotely or not, or whether or not they look forward to coming in to be able to discuss things with the team. Big picture is it shows that we all deal with remote working, hybrid working differently, depending on our behaviours, depending on our strengths. So let's look at that now in a little bit more detail. Let's go a little bit more granular for each of those team roles, because I think that's where it's going to be really useful for everybody. And I think when we go through these, try and picture yourself if you know your own team role strengths, but also that of your colleagues. Does this ring true? Before we delve a little bit deeper into those team roles, however, for those of you who are less familiar with Belbin, a team role really is defined as a cluster of behaviours that are needed for the team to succeed. Now, we know that in the workplace there are infinite amount of ways that you behave. But Meredith Belbin and his team found that there was only 9 distinct clusters of behaviour which were useful. Big distinction. And the other key thing is this: we are looking at behaviour, not personality. Behaviour is what we do, how we contribute. It is a verb, it is not a noun. It's not saying I am, it's saying this is my contribution. So without further ado, let's look at each of those team roles in a hybrid environment, looking predominantly at communication. So we'll start with resource investigator. This is my top role, whether I like it or not. I try to reduce it and it keeps just popping up again. Now, we know that resource investigators are typically strong in maintaining communication when working remotely because they've been working remotely, in theory, all the time anyway. They're never in the office. But they can sometimes feel a little bit isolated. They've got nobody to, people just waiting there with cups of tea, nobody to sort of report back to. Um, so it can feel a little isolating for them. Now, they get their energy from those informal encounters, from those chance happenings. And again, they can sometimes be missed when working in a very sort of scheduled environment. And we need to be aware of that. So, those chance encounters, those chance conversations don't always happen. So we somehow need to be able to get this in a, we need to sort of structure this a little bit so that they don't miss out. So when you're communicating with the resource investigator, we need to keep our communication lively, exploratory, very opportunity focused, to keep them interested, remembering that the resource investigators are the ones that have got so many plates spinning, they've got so many things going on, and look, oh, there's another shiny thing, is that to keep them engaged when working online, we need to make sure that we keep their focus. We need to provide that space for them to share their ideas. Or have you heard what's happened here? Oh, I was over here. This is what happened. We need to provide that space, which needs to be quite informal. We need to give them that environment, but we need to gently guide them so that they do try and keep concise. We need to offer them that environment by perhaps offering an informal drop-in. This may happen on a Thursday or on a Tuesday at 10. Everybody who wants to, pop in. Make sure that they don't feel completely isolated from the rest of the team. And encourage them to share their contacts with everybody else. If they're not in the office, they will be talking to people, developing contacts. Their little black book will be growing. They need to be able to share this with the team. It can't be something that is just kept to them. And again, it's easier when you're in person, because they will come and tell you, they will come and find you and tell you all about it. So this is the best way really to try and communicate with the resource investigator behaviour. Keep the energy high, keep them engaged, give them space to be able to share what they've been up to, and keep tabs on them. That's all I would say, because you never quite know what they're up to. Now we have the coordinator. Now, the coordinator is the one that sees the big picture, who delegates brilliantly. And so is naturally, their tendency when you're communicating is they're great at chairing meetings. They're great at ensuring that everybody's voices are heard. Again, they're very good at clarifying goals, clarifying priorities, what tasks are allocated to who. So give them that role when working online, when working virtually. Now, they are great if you want to communicate and use different facilitation tools with them. Make sure that they balance their airtime. And with the coordinators as well, encourage discussions so that there aren't any problems hidden online. You want everything that they're doing to be out in the open. Coordinators can sometimes be a little bit manipulative, and you're wondering why it is that they've asked this to happen or this to happen, and that can be lost when working virtually. So make sure that you ask those questions to make sure there aren't any hidden agendas going on, which remain even more hidden when working online. Team workers. Now, team workers are all about people, about listening, about feelings, about empathy. So we want to ensure that we don't lose that. The team workers are the glue that keep the team together, and I think that this is even more important when working in a virtual environment. The team workers really are the pulse. They know what's going on. They know how people are feeling. They are really important at keeping that psychological safety, that trust around. So please don't ignore them virtually. To communicate, we need to make sure that it is personal with the team. I can ask them how they are feeling, ask them about their family, ask them about things outside of the work. And don't skip that. That is an incredibly important part of a team worker. Give them roles that allow them to keep, getting that team cohesion, checking in with others, ensuring that others are okay. What you do need to do, however, is not give them too much, because if you are working virtually with the team workers, what we find is a lot of it is hidden, and they'll be taking more and more on, perhaps more and more the emotion on, because they want to help, and you may not be able to always see that. So be careful with the team workers. Don't overload them too much. And again, make sure that they have space for social connection. This is really important. Make sure that they can still see everybody. So those three roles, the resource investigator, the coordinator, and the team worker, we call the social roles. And therefore, they're social because they interact a lot with other people. Whether or not it's from a negotiation, whether or not it's from being able to delegate accordingly, or whether or not it's being able to listen and everything else. So the people element, the camera on element is incredibly important here. They are the ones who tend to have their cameras on. They're the ones that want to see you. They want to smile at you. They want to get that human interaction. Again, that needs to be taken into consideration. The next team role we have here is plants. Now, plants really, they love working by themselves. Like I said before, they are the ones that have all the ideas coming to them. They need time, they need reflection time to really make the most of that. They often thrive in those remote settings. So give them an opportunity to thrive. Give them an opportunity to come up with the ideas and that problem solving that they need. And don't expect immediate replies. Build in time when working with plants for them to go and have that think before they come back again. And you need an element, you need to trust them. Just because they may not be sort of producing huge amounts of work doesn't mean that they're not working. That's not their style. One thing with the plant is they do get shut down quite quickly by monitor evaluators. Plants tend to be quite sensitive when their ideas are criticised. So you do need to provide them space where it's going to be a non-critique environment, where ideas are allowed to be free-flowing without fear of somebody saying, well, that's not going to work. So make sure you have that space there for the plant behaviour. And do have those regular check-ins. Sometimes plants do go left at the traffic lights because they think something might be quite interesting, and that's great. But you need to keep bringing them in, check them in. Otherwise, they may not have alignment with those overall team objectives. With a monitor evaluator, they're again, they like working by themselves. They like to take all that information, lay back, have a good think, and come up with the right solution. So give them time and space to be able to do that. Make sure you share information ahead of time so they're pre-warned. They've already started sifting through the information, and invite their analysis explicitly. They're not the ones who are going to be, yeah, pick me. They're definitely not a pick me person. So make sure that you invite them to contribute when required. Give them permission. Again, avoid rushing those decisions. Allow them time for that thoughtful evaluation. So when the shaper gets involved, say, come on, we just need to make the decision now. Make sure that you're building space around that, because otherwise the monitor evaluator won't thrive. And use a structured sort of format for them. And the pros, the cons, the lists. Make sure that information that you are sharing with them is in a format in which it is easier for them to digest. Matt, I'm glad I've just described you perfectly as a plant. Fantastic. Specialists. Now, specialists, again, are quite happy working remotely. They're the ones with that deep dive there to make sure that they have all of the information that they and the team needs. So when you're communicating with them, ask them focused questions about their particular subject area. I don't know what that may be. That may be, I don't know, HR law or whatever you brought people in to do. Make sure that you ask them a very targeted question, because they're not going to be around to have that clarification. So make sure they're very focused to start with. Make sure there are lots of time limits within meetings that you have with specialists, because otherwise it will be information overload. You always tell a specialist by asking them a question on their specialist subject and they're still talking 20 minutes later. Make sure you do acknowledge the fact, however, these skills are needed. Again, they may feel slightly sidelined. So ensure that when they are contributing, you're asking them for their contribution. You're asking them to show off their depth of knowledge and what they've actually found. Because again, they may overspeak, they may overtalk due to their absolute passion. Make sure their feedback and it's within a designated time slot. That is incredibly important. So the last three roles there, and we've talked about, are the plant, the monitoring evaluator, and the specialist. Now, these are what we call the thinking roles. And the thinking roles really thrive wherever they are. But what they do need, and what our research did show, is that whilst they are quite happy and they thrive doing their work without disruption and without people asking questions all the time, they do need connection with the team. And this hybrid working, coming into the office, is incredibly important for them to be able to get that. Okay, the shaper role. Now, the shaper role is the one that needs stuff done yesterday. They have high energy and they thrive on momentum and to try and keep the team focused on its goals. So when you're communicating with a shaper, make sure it's concise, it's direct, and it's purposeful. It's not that they don't care and that they don't have a family and life outside of work, but just keep it to the point. This is what they're after. And make sure that when you do communicate with them, it's clear, there's deadlines, and you need to make sure that ownership really is there to keep that momentum visible. Who's going to be doing what? What's expected of them? Make sure that that's really clear when you communicate. With shapers, what they don't like is when you have these really large meetings. I mean, does anybody like those large meetings when you've got 30 different, rectangles? The shaper can feel that that's really inhibiting progress. So split it up into smaller sub-teams so you can work quicker and faster. And that's a whole different webinar looking at size of teams to make sure that we can see that there is still progress being made. With the shaper as well, it's really important with that communication because they are so direct. Sometimes they can come across as a little bit harsh. So just check with that communication channel because you may feel offended. It hasn't been meant that way. So check in and clarify tone. I know myself, again, shaper is one of my top roles, and I write the email and then I have to go in at the beginning and say, hi, how are you? I have to check through, I put lots of exclamation marks, emojis, to try to make it more palatable. Whereas my first draft is, where is it? I thought we were doing it on Tuesday. Send. I can't do that. I'm very aware of the way that I communicate. We're then looking at the implementer team roles. Now, implementers are reliable, they're hardworking, and they really they like a structured environment. So you need to communicate with them online. And I mean, this advice goes when you're in person as well, but in a very structured and orderly way. Have clear agendas, clear expectations. They're hardworking. They will be rolling up their sleeve and they're doing what needs to happen for the team. So respect that. Make sure that you haven't got this laissez-faire approach when working with an implementer. Respect their time. Respect the fact that there is a process behind everything. Now, implementers really don't like change. So if you are going to be implementing some change, and this does happen, I'm finding more in an online environment, especially with all different technology, AI, everything else sort of changing the environment the whole time, don't just say, oh, by the way, we're doing it differently now. An implementer needs time to be able to process what the changes are, the rationale behind the changes. And in fact, if you give them to it early enough, they'll actually plan the change themselves. The other thing is with the implementer, make sure they've got what they need when working virtually. Make sure that they have all of the tools, everything that they need to be efficient, because one thing they hate is inefficiency. Okay, and last but not least here, we're looking at the completer finisher behaviour. They're the ones with the attention to detail. They're the ones who really love working from home because there's nobody distracting them. They can have a full focus on making sure there are no omissions, no mistakes, just looking at that detail, ensuring that standards are as high as possible. When you do communicate with a completer finisher, you need to offer clarity on priorities. Make sure that they don't keep checking and checking and checking and checking and checking and checking and checking. Make sure you're going in with them, checking in with them so that that doesn't happen. Completer finishers have relatively high anxiety. That's what makes them check. But when you're working in a hybrid environment, you may not be able to see this. So make sure that you do check in with them on a regular basis. Keep communication with them very calm, very predictable, no surprises, so to speak. Again, because you don't want to heighten that anxiety any more than it needs to be. And encourage boundaries, checking that they are logging off at the time that they should be, because otherwise they will be overworking very much when in a hybrid environment. Now, those three roles, the shaper, completer, finisher, implementer, they're all task roles. They're all about getting things done. And again, we need to make sure that they can get stuff done and that we check in with them as and when we need. Now, I've gone through that quite quickly, and I do apologise for that. But what we're trying to really point out here is each of these team roles works in a virtual environment very differently. There isn't a one and done approach when working with people, whether it is online or whether or not it is in the office. We need to ensure that we understand how this manifests itself when online to ensure that we can manage the team most effectively. And there's another thing that we need to take into consideration here, and that is whether or not it's a new team or it's an established team, and whether or not that person is a new member of that team. So, going back to our research, we looked at communication about whether or not it's effective within the team, whether or not somebody is a member of a newly formed team, a newcomer to a team, or an established team. And as we can see here, there are differences depending on the newness of the team and whether or not somebody's new to the team. Again, be very conscious of that. Remember that communication channels have already been quite established with an existing team. So somebody coming new into that may find it quite difficult. And as you can see, nobody really, with the exception of when you've got an existing team, is saying it's more effective when working remotely. Another area to look at this is the engagement with my team, again, looking at whether or not somebody's just joined a newly formed team or whether or not it's an existing team. As we can see here, people are more engaged with their team when at their workplace if they are a newly formed team. Again, if they're a newcomer to that team, it matters less whether or not it's an existing team. So be conscious when working with teams, not just the difference in behavioural type, but also where is that team right now, new, existing, and what about that individual going into that team? That's incredibly important. And again, when we're looking at connection to an organization's culture, we can see that if you are a newcomer to an existing team, that person will feel far more connected to the culture of the organization, more so when they are in the workplace. Again, food for thought. So, what does all of this matter? We're looking here at how to help your teams work brilliantly, regardless of where they are. Well, you'll recognize these slides if you were at our webinar a couple of weeks ago when we were looking at high performing teams. We know that once the objective, once the understanding what it is that you're there to achieve has been agreed, and that can take some time, we need to ensure that we have all of those 9 team roles represented somewhere. It could be that you need more than one team role, maybe that you don't need a plant perhaps, but you need to know where it is. They're not all required at the same time, and everybody can obviously play more than one of those behaviours. But this is the first starting point to really have an effective team. I think this is more critical when you are working online, especially if you have got a cloned culture, for example. So having, I don't know, a high implementer culture when you're all working together and having a high implementer culture when you're all working online can have really, I think it's quite a different way of managing things. So you need to be conscious of where are those team roles? Do we have what's required? Self-awareness is also incredibly key. So we're going through those team roles and hopefully you're saying, oh yeah, no, that I feel that that's mine. Or you may have your Belbin reports, you know where your strengths are. But sharing those strengths and understanding those strengths are absolutely key. But first of all, we need to start with self. Understand yourself. Get that observer feedback in. Again, observer feedback, for those of you who aren't so aware of it, is when we ask for feedback from other people that we work with in a team to see whether or not the behaviours that we think that we are showing are actually seen, whether or not they're validated by everybody else. Now, when we're working in person, we expect people, if you work together for about 3 months, people get to know you quite well. I think that period needs to be extended if you're working in a hybrid team. So I don't think we're seeing that much of an individual until we've started to perhaps those 2 or 3 days a week start accumulating. So maybe leave it a bit longer before you ask for feedback from others, but it is critical that we get it. And then the key thing is not just understanding your strengths of yourself and everybody else in the team, but how are you going to work together? We know that high performing teams use we, not I. They put the needs of the team above self. And we need to really work out how we work together. And only once we've done these three things can we start working together, and we can start making that transition to a high performing team. I think on this, it's quite interesting is before COVID happened, we were invited to join the Institute of Leadership on a lecture tour around the UK. And we were talking about virtual working because we worked with, like I said, we're a global organisation, and we've worked with many multinational organisations that may have offices throughout the world, and they wanted to have advice on how do they work best together. And everything is still key, but we're talking more about time zones then. We're talking more about cultural differences. I mean, it's changed a little bit now. We're talking about it because it's not just for those multinational teams. At the time, I asked Meredith for his advice, and he said one of the key elements is you get everybody together at least once. And I will reiterate this. We're talking really about hybrid teams today, but if you are working 100% virtually, please do try and find time so everybody can meet up at least once face to face. It's going to make such a difference for the effectiveness of your team. Now, so what is what I'm going to say. We've looked at the behaviours, we understand what a team needs, but how do we go about doing this? I've stolen this because I'm a high resource investigator from LinkedIn. I saw it a couple of weeks ago and took a screenshot. We spoke a few weeks ago, didn't we, about how professional athletes, we were talking about rugby in particular, they practice, they practice, they practice, they play. They practice, they practice, they practice, they play. They spend a lot of time practicing and training for the work that needs to be done. And yet in the corporate world, we don't do that. We just have one day's training perhaps, and we expect that we'll be fine for everything else. Within the concept of hybrid working, we need to change this. We need to think of ourselves more as athletes. We need to spend more time together training so that when we are working remotely, that we keep our effectiveness. Going back to that very original quote, is people go into the office and they don't do anything. They just continue this on Zoom meetings. There's no need for them to come into the office. When people are coming into the office in a hybrid, we need to spend time with the team, working out how the team is going to work best. We need to really emphasize our team contracts. We need to have those conversations around when we are working remotely, how do we collaborate? What are going to be the rules of when we work remotely? And simple rules for those people, again, who don't quite feel as engaged with their team because they're new. They need to know what those rules are. They need to be explicit. They need to be written down. Even little things like whether or not it's camera on, camera off. These kinds of things, they need to be explicit. Are you expected to turn up for everything? What is the protocol of actually raising your hand? All of these things need to be reiterated for every new person who joins the team. And actually as a reminder for everybody else as well. But we need to spend time on how we collaborate. How do we do that? Well, when we're talking about collaboration, sometimes we're seeing the leader or the manager of the team collaborating individually with everybody in the team. And that's important. How we communicate with each of those team roles, our team roles, this is really important, but it's as equally important as how everybody within the team is talking and communicating and collaborating with one another. We would recommend using this page of your reports as a really good starting point. So when you are all in the office, perhaps you come into the office on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, come into the office with your Belbin reports on this page, your suggested work styles, because none of us are just one of those team roles. We are all a wonderful mix of those behaviours, some of which we play at different times depending on what the team needs. This page is looking at your top 4 team role strengths. And it describes the way in which you prefer to work. So in this case, it's the implementer team worker, meeting requirements. Let me make that a little bit bigger so you can see it. I make a point of trying to adapt to the needs of people in the organisation. The deploying quality processes. I'm at my most effective when I can improve procedures as I apply them. So what we have here is a wonderful language of saying, this is how I prefer to work. Now, if they're sat down with somebody else, perhaps they've got this in front of them, somebody said, okay, that's interesting, but I really like to be responsible for grasping opportunities and driving things forward, or I like to control and take charge of what's going on. If they both have these together in front, so you have the whole team with this page, we can start that dialogue of how to best work together. And this is done beautifully on a one-to-one basis. So I would encourage you to sit down with your team when you're on one of those days in the office. You're working out how to work as a team, and this is work. By the way, this is not an optional and extra. This is not a nice to have. It is work itself. It's have everybody to sit there with their Belbin reports and really think, well, this is, and have like a this is me moment. You can do this collectively, you can do this on a one-to-one. This is how I prefer to work. This is how I prefer to work in person and online. Sometimes I can be. This is what I need from you. And what do you need from me? So this is a great way of, and Belbin, the language of Belbin, the framework of Belbin, allows these conversations to be depersonalized. Sometimes I can be a little bit too shaper. Sometimes I can be a little bit too complete a finisher. We can do this, and it helps us to, really to explore that using the language of Belbin. Also look at their contribution to the team. So this is me, this is how I feel. Now, when I'm working within the team, I am needed to really increase my shaper behavior. It's needed because otherwise the team will start falling behind. I may come across as quite brusque. I may come across as being quite direct. Let me know when it's gone too far and I have upset anybody. Please let me know when this is causing a problem for you. Please let me know when it's being detrimental to the good of the team. And how can I help you with your contribution to the team? What is it that we need together? How do we work together to be able to produce the most effective team possible? This looks so simple, doesn't it, when written on a slide? But with hybrid working, we need to be far more deliberate here. We need to put these contracts between individuals and within the team in place so that when we are working remotely, when we are having the days out of the office during a hybrid working, that the team still functions. Each of us is going to be working online in a different way depending on our behavioral styles, and we need to acknowledge that. This is a really insightful exercise that anybody can do using your Belbin reports to be able to make those relationships just work. So, crikey, that was a quick 43 minutes. I feel I've covered everything. Why do we do this? Meredith Belbin always says, simply putting together a number of people and expecting them to work as a team is not enough. I just like to say that simply putting together a number of people and expecting them to work in a hybrid team is also not enough. We need to spend time with our teams, understand their differences, understand how those behaviours show up, and spend time as professional athletes working on how the team works together, regardless of where they may be based. Thank you for your time today. If anybody has any questions, please do put them in the comments, and we'll have five or so minutes to be able to address them now. Just to re-emphasize, this is being recorded. I have gone through things incredibly quickly. The recording will be there this afternoon. You'll receive a copy of a link to that wonderful document from the House of Lords looking at an overview of hybrid working. I will also share with you our study on hybrid working that really was linking how we feel, how we communicate with those team roles. And for those of you that have the third edition of Team Roles at Work, This was co-authored by Meredith Belbin and Victoria Brown, our head of R&D, is that there is a wonderful chapter at the end there, all talking about teams in a virtual environment. So there's plenty of resources for you. Please take care to spend time with your teams and spend time with them to work and work out how to work best as a team. It doesn't matter where they are based. Oh, got some questions now. There's always a delay with these things. Okay, Nicola, are there any questions we could use when we come together as a team and share our team roles to ensure we work well together? How might we deal with gaps we notice from the team, for example? It's a really good question, Nicola. You see this behind me? You can't see it particularly well. It's a team circle. And I would say that this is the basis for the majority of the work that we do, whether not facilitating or coaching, is that we get everybody to share their top 2 or 3 team roles, get a post-it, stick it on the circle, and it will immediately demonstrate where those gaps are and where those overlaps are. It really demonstrates whether or not you have a particular culture. You know, are you all in the same area? Also, putting different coloured post-its for where people's bottom team roles lie. That can be really informative as well. You can also have an exercise where you get everybody to stand around the room and you have team role icons around the room and everybody stands by their top team role. And just by having that movement alone and then to their second team role, to their bottom team role, will demonstrate where those team roles lie within your team. And then to just ask the question, there is nobody with a strength in monitor evaluator. What does this mean for the team? Does it matter? What are we going to do to ensure that our ideas are thought through properly and that we make the right decisions? And bring it open to the team. So there's lots of ways you can do that, Nicola, especially if you're accredited, we will give you all of these exercises that you can run. So look at the Belbin accreditation, but you can do this with teams and groups. I've used this exercise with quite a few people. Wonderful. Thank you, Lindsay. Yes, saying absolutely that the wheel or the circle, however you want to call it, is really great at just having that visual. Because, you know, otherwise the reports tend to just stay in drawers. We need to make them come alive. We need to help them, you know, understand where those strengths and weaknesses are. Okay, I hope that's okay. Brilliant. Thank you, Nicola. I'm going to leave you now so that you can go and have another cup of tea, coffee, lunch, wherever you are in the world, go to sleep. So thank you so much for joining us today, and please keep your eyes out for another email because we have loads more webinars that we'll be sharing with you very shortly. So thank you very much.